Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So yesterday I watched George Harrison's, or Martin Scorsese's production of George Harrison's, was it this Living in a Material World? And it was really quite interesting to see his beliefs and more about him. Obviously I grew up, well, my dad had these, obviously the Red and Blue album, and Wings is Band on the Run of Venus and Mars, and some John Lennon, Walls and Bridges, I think Imagine. So yeah, obviously I know who George Harrison is, and I was a big Beatles fan, primarily more McCartney than I have all of his albums, but I do have some George Harrison albums. Obviously I like Cloud 9 and Brainwashed, the last two that he did, and I think I have the Travelling Wilburys as well. So yeah, so it was interesting to hear, his thoughts on life, and I don't know, it did touch me afterwards, because I kept thinking about it, but I don't know, I do get obsessed when it comes to death. I remember when I saw it was like a Lifetime film about Paul and Linda, about Linda's death, and I thought about that for ages. I couldn't stop thinking about it, though, that moment of him at Linda's bedside when she's going, and just imagining how painful that must have been. And now I was thinking about that with George Harrison and his last meeting with Paul and Ringo, and holding his hand for 4 hours, and George rubbing his hand, and obviously because Paul brought George into the Beatles. I don't know. And then when Olivia Harrison, his wife, talked about the moment when he died, about if there was a camera in there, you wouldn't need any lighting because it was bright. I wonder what that meant. Like, when he died, did you see his soul leave his body? Is that what she's trying to suggest? Or the room was lit up by, a light through the window at that moment when he passed. And like, how must it be to, I don't know, which way is better to die? Is it better to to have a massive heart attack and just die, or die in your sleep? I mean, a lot of people talk about dying in your sleep, but then you're left with no goodbye. You're left with, the person next to you waking up to find you dead. And, but with something like, say, cancer, I mean, as horrible it is, but it gives you that date, as it were, that your time is up, and you get a chance to experience the end and say goodbyes and stuff. Well, I don't know, death seems to be so cruel when you think about it, but I guess we can't all live forever. What would it be like if we had to live forever? God, imagine living forever in this world. If you were born during the medieval times, or even now, depending what you have, if you were rich and wealthy, yeah, but still living forever, it wouldn't give you any, it's like having Christmas every day. It would lose its quality of existence. So I get it why we have to die, but it does still seem cruel, and the fact that we have no way of deciding how it's done at the end. We don't know when that moment comes, and how it is to, I don't know, to witness that moment, to live through that moment. The closest I may have mentioned this before was with my previous wife, her cousin. She was a lovely lady. She had cancer. I believe it went and then it came back, and I was in the hospital visiting her with the in-laws, and I remember I was a Muslim back then, praying up and down, walking up and down her bed. I could hear her ventilator, that's all you could hear. She was unconscious, she was in a coma. I assume that's what it was, but she wasn't speaking or anything or moving, and she had the oxygen mask. All you could hear is like the deep breaths with like water obviously in the lungs, or that sound. And I was up and down praying for her to somehow survive, or well, I don't even remember what I was praying for now, but obviously for her I was praying. And just obviously her husband and her children were visiting. I remember we all came out, and then I don't know who went in, whether it must have been one of them, and one of them ran back frantically saying, "Come." Obviously, we couldn't go. It was just the family, close family, the husband and the children went. Obviously, it was the moment when she was going. And the next I saw of her was obviously once we were allowed in, and then there was no noise, and she'd obviously passed. So that's the closest it's ever come. So I've never seen that moment of death that obsesses me. And if you read my poems, The Dead City, or even my singular poems, or even these Pursuits of Truth, I seem to talk about it quite a lot. I don't know why. Well, obviously, I'm not looking forward to it. Well, some ways I am, because then I don't have to put up with the inequalities in this poor existence. But I say poor existence, obviously not in connection with my wife and my children and day-to-day life, but poor existence in the way that humanity treats humanity in that way. I'd like to live to an old age so that me and my wife, we just fall into death together, holding hands, and our children are old enough to understand and are living their own lives and are maybe married as well, so that I don't have to worry about them. But I know when I was growing up, every night in bed I would pray for my mum and dad to live forever. Now I see that when they do go, I'll be able to understand it, but obviously I'm going to miss them and their presence. And I already think about the times before, when Christmas and all that kind of stuff, and that longing feeling that I have that is similar to my feeling towards death, of something you can't get back, like the friends that you can't get back and the times you can't get back. Those things have always haunted me. But yeah, it was interesting hearing about George and his spirituality and his belief in the afterlife. And he was saying, like, wow, I've only got my son to look after. I don't really need to stay here anymore. He didn't actually, I don't think he mentioned his wife, which is a bit remiss, but I guess he was talking about the things he definitely needed to do, like bring up his son. But other than that, he couldn't see a reason why he needed to stay. I mean, it's very profound when you think about that, and just, them describing how he got attacked. I didn't know it was that ferocious. I remember when he got attacked after his first cancer scare and being stabbed, I just saw it as that. But when DhaniHarrison was describing it, getting hit over the head and them both being in A&E, it just seemed so traumatic. And I know, it just seems. And then I think about like the friendship of the Beatles, which I often think is a bit sad, that the way they ended. I mean, obviously they may have still been friends, but wasting their energy fighting with each other and not recording or having more music with each other just because of these silly little, ego battles between themselves. It must be difficult for them to think about, the time they lost. I know I feel that with things. But yeah, it was a really interesting documentary Martin Scorsese did, and it shed a bit of light on George Harrison within the Beatles and his character. And I guess he's often overlooked because of Lennon and McCartney, but his songs were, they were just as good as, they were Beatles songs irrespective, and just as good as Lennon and McCartney's songs. And I often think that Cloud 9 is the closest Beatle album that was made post-Beatles. It's a really good album. It sounds very Beatlesque. I mean, obviously Flaming Pie you could put with that, or maybe even Imagine. But yeah, that was a really good album, and I don't know, it made me think about it a lot after I watched it. You know, the things that he said about life, and I don't know, I suppose you have to watch it too. I can't really pinpoint what it exactly is, but it was just, I don't know, I feel a kind of sadness as well for him. And I don't know, I suppose that's because of the way his life ended early. But that's the thing when I talk about like the system all the time, pursuits of the truth, that, you know, we're allowing this to happen. You know, I think that if we didn't live in the system we live in, where everything's divided and everything's about competition and money, you've got all these pharmaceutical companies, and the problem is obviously if you've got a wonder drug like chemotherapy, which is very expensive, you know, you don't want a wonder pill when you're making so much money out of that. It brings that problematic thing with money and medical healthcare, which if we didn't have money and we'd had a different system, and also like having different pharmaceutical companies around the world doing the same research, competing against each other, when if we were working as humanity, which we are truly, I think we would have been a lot more advanced, let's put it that way, with cancer treatments, and maybe even eradicating, and also maybe the way we live, because we live so gluttony and greedily and without education, you know, because of, you know, the supermarkets and the competition of money. It's all about putting stuff out there, even if it's unhealthy or carcinogenic, which we know carcinogenic means something that can cause cancer if it has that within you, like red meat and stuff like that. If we know all these things, in the system that we live in, we still allow it all to be out there, and it's your choice to eat it. Obviously, if we live with any sense, we would know these things, and we do know what causes carcinogenics, and we would maybe decide, well, we're not going to sell that anymore, because that will then stop cancer, or at least it will reduce a lot more cancers and allow you know, people to live longer, healthier lives, rather than people taking Russian roulette with health and eating, which, because of the way we've been brought up, you know, by eating these things, when we know they're carcinogenics, then, well, what do you expect? So yeah, it's like, I don't know. Anyway, it was a really interesting documentary by Martin Scorsese on George Harrison, living in the material world. Give it a check. It shows, you know, if you're a Beatles fan, obviously it shows about the Beatles, him within the Beatles, post-Beatles. Obviously, if you're interested in religion, it's got a lot about his religious beliefs and afterlife and stuff like that. So it's really interesting. I'm sure that usually when I record these things afterwards, I think, oh yeah, why didn't I mention that? That was what I wanted to talk about. I don't know why I always do that. But anyway, I think I've waffled on enough. Take care, God bless, and peace.